So we're going to wrap up the digestive system. In the top cartoon, it says, one of my baby teeth came out. I have to say, I'm not entirely comfortable holding a piece of my own head. And then the bottom one, Mom says the tooth fairy might give me 50 cents for this tooth. Wow. So I got an idea. I poured plaster over the tooth to make a mold, and now I'm casting duplicate teeth. I'll put one under the pillow every night, and by the end of the year, I'll have over $150. Do you think the tooth fairy will believe your mouth has 300 teeth in it? If she'd rather have an old tooth than 50 cents, how bright could she be? So, we've worked our way in the mouth, into the pharynx, into the esophagus, through, this would be where the diaphragm would be, over the top of the liver, through the diaphragm, into the stomach. It's weird, this underside of the liver the stomach should be between us and that. Now we're about to go into the small intestine, and go into the large intestine here, that's where the appendix is, and then up and across and down and a little squiggle toward the backside. This is the gallbladder, this is the liver, this is sort of the pancreas, and those are the things we're going to talk about now. The small intestine is subdivided into three segments. The nature of the cells changes a little bit. You've got the duodenum, the duodenum, the jejunum, and the ileum. You know, we're not going to get into it that far, but it's a decent length tube, and this is where this happens. Breakdown of materials to an absorbable bunch of pieces. Terminal, final digestion. Remember, your stomach hasn't done any kind of real breakdown, it's just started it. You do absorb some things from your stomach lining, but those are things that can get through the mucus pretty easily and are already absorbable. Minerals, there's a bunch of minerals you can absorb from your stomach. You can absorb water from the lining of your stomach. But the big molecules, the big things that we build us out of, it's just kind of clipped them into a few pieces to send them off to this, where they will be broken down to the little components that we build people out of. The lining of the intestine is wrinkly. So instead of being smooth, it's more surface. It has big projections on it, big out pocketings, again, to make the lining longer than what's on the outside. And the cells themselves have lots and lots and lots of microvilli. We talked about those a long time ago. So a cell surface with a lot of little wiggly projections. And somebody did the calculations. I don't know how reliable they are, but it gives you an interesting idea. Now your small intestine is maybe 7-9 feet long and not much bigger around than your finger. So the space inside would be smaller. But they figured out that if you could take all the wrinkles and flatten them out, if you could take all the big projections and flatten them out, if you could take all the little bitty projections and flatten them out, that you had surface area about the equivalent of a soccer field. So that's a lot of surface, and it has to be because all these little pieces have to get out of your digestive system and into your circulation. Some of it goes into your blood, some of it goes into tissue fluid around the intestines, and it drains out through the lymph system. But it gets in there somehow. Two accessory organs, the pancreas and the gallbladder. The lining of your intestine produces a lot of enzymes to help the breakdown of big molecules to bits and pieces. An awful lot of the enzymes to do that come from your pancreas. Your pancreas is connected to your small intestine through a tube that actually meets the tube from this before it actually hits the small intestine. And so you have all those different enzymes I talked about where, you know, glycine to serine connections, there's an enzyme to break that. Glutamic acid to phenylalanine, there's a connection to break that. So all of the different amino acids that connect along the string of a protein, you have enzymes that will grab that and stress it and pop it apart until all you have is amino acids to absorb. It'll get into starches that are not too solidly held together and pop the sugars apart so you can absorb the sugars. Even something as simple as cane sugar, which is sucrose and fructose connected to one another, you got to get those apart in order to absorb them effectively. And so you have sucrase, an enzyme that pops those apart, and you absorb glucose, which we use for energy, and fructose, which we pop open and integrate into fat molecules. Your pancreas also makes bicarbonate, the same thing that's in baking soda. And just as baking soda can be used to tamp down acidity, that's what the bicarbonate your pancreas makes. It tosses it at that stomach acid coming out in a controlled fashion through the sphincters, through the valves, and it immediately takes a very acidic environment and turns it into a very slightly basic environment. And that's where these enzymes work the best. They don't work well in acid. In fact, that one lone enzyme that's working in your stomach, once it gets out of the stomach acid and hits the bicarbonate and the acidity changes, it loses its shape and stops being effective. And we actually break it down and absorb the amino acids from it. And that's part of the kind of amazingness of this, is that we have all these molecules in there working that we don't digest because they're working. But we still can't get our, for the most part, our immune system working. It works in the lining, but it doesn't work in the spaces. So that's why there's a lot of things that live in the digestive system and don't need to worry about our immune systems being able to get at them. We will digest it. Bile. Not to be confused with stomach acid, which people do all the time. They talk about bile like it's acidic. Bile is an emulsifier. It's no more dangerous than dish soap, which is also an emulsifier. We talked about this in the lab where you take in lipids, right, fats and oils, and you need to break them down and then build your own lipids out of them because all of our cell membranes are made out of that stuff, and steroid hormones and fat, all that stuff. But heated up to body temperature, lipids tend to form blobs. And the enzymes that break those down can only break them down from the outside, working their way in. So if it's a really big blob, it takes a really long time. And if very large blobs are going through your digestive system, it's a long tube, but they'll get all the way through before we're done digesting them if they're too big. And what bile does is it interferes with the ability of the blobs to hold it together, and they break up into little blobs. That's what detergent does too, for grease on a pan or oils in clothes and that sort of thing. Doesn't do any digestion, doesn't break the molecules down. It just loosens the molecules' tendency to stick together. And when it's a little blob, working your way from the outside in, you got plenty of time to break it down and absorb the pieces completely. So it's an important component. Now, your liver makes the bile. Your gallbladder stores the bile. So if you eat a big fatty meal, you've got this reserve of bile to go down and help break the blobs up. If you have to have your gallbladder removed, the bile can crystallize and form crystals that can block the tubes. That's dangerous when stuff can't get through the tubes. Then you may need to have your gallbladder taken out. And your liver's still doing this, but doesn't have the reserves that it did before. So you don't eat anything, too fatty, or you will have blobs that when the blobs get down into your colon, both your microbiome gets a little dicey when that happens, and also things get slippery down there. Okay, I keep seeing flashes on the screen. I'm not sure if you're seeing that or not, but I don't think it's the bulb flashing. It might be the screen flashing. But if you're seeing flashes, I don't know what's going on. So your liver makes bile that's going to go down in health. Your liver also processes materials from your blood, and it will send breakdown products. Some stuff gets recycled, some stuff isn't worth recycling, so you send it down to your small intestine. Sorry, I'm watching this to see if the flashes I'm seeing on the screen are actually behind me, and I don't think that's what's going on. I mentioned when you break down hemoglobin, you recycle the iron really well. The protein itself, there are a couple of components that just aren't worth the trouble of recycling, and your liver's not digested particularly. And one of the components goes down into your small intestine. It's brown. It colors everything down there brown. And one of the components flushes out through your kidneys. It's yellow. It colors your urine yellow. Weird that the breakdown product of the same thing gives us very familiar colors. A big thing that your liver does it's a processor. There's a number of molecules that can be picked up from food that if they got into your general circulation, they would be poisonous. And so your liver absorbs those from the blood. The blood has to go through your liver to get into your general circulation. It pulls a bunch of sugar out and stores it. Sugar isn't toxic, but you don't really want a huge amount of it in your circulation. But also things like alcohol. Alcohol is neurotoxic. That's why you get drunk. It messes with your brain cells. How much it actually kills is debatable. Many, many years ago, there's some random study went, it's killing brain cells, and that's what everybody remembers. But it isn't that clear that alcohol, in huge, huge numbers, sure. But in normal, even abnormal drinking, how many brain cells it damages is another deal. It can damage the liver cells that are trying to detoxify it, though. And so people that throw a lot of alcohol at their liver, the liver will convert more cells to detoxification of alcohol. That's why if you don't drink, it's easy to get drunk. If you drink a lot, it's not so easy to get that alcohol through your liver and into your general circulation and get it to your brain. I also should mention, it processes a lot of chemicals, and this becomes an issue for delivering drugs. That if you want to deliver drugs through a pill, you need to get them past your stomach acid. You need to get them absorbed properly in the right form from your intestines so that your digestion doesn't mess with them so that they don't work. And then you got to get them past the processing that happens in the liver. Now sometimes the drug designers actually make that work for them. Acetaminophen, the chemical in Tylenol, the chemical in the pill isn't going to actually cure your headache. The pill chemical, once it's processed in your liver, that chemical will affect your headache. But it's detoxified in a several step process. Every step has enzymes for it. There's a step in the middle where you don't have as many enzymes for that particular step as you do for the other steps. And if you overwhelm the system, you get to that midpoint molecule and you don't have enough enzymes to quickly take it to the next stage, that midpoint molecule is very, very poisonous. Usually it doesn't hang around long enough to poison anything. But if you throw a lot of Tylenol at this system, you get a bottleneck right there and you can poison your liver. And that enzyme is also involved in detoxifying alcohol. So if you got a whole bunch of acetaminophen and alcohol in the system, that enzyme is doubly overwhelmed. It's not only don't you have that much of it, but some of it's busy doing something else, and it can really cause liver toxicity. Not something that you hear a lot about, but an overdose of Tylenol can kill you pretty effectively. You know, because when your liver shut down, you looked at all the things that your liver does when you look through the lab. You can't live without your liver being functional. In advanced cases of alcoholism, liver cells start to die. Your liver's pretty good at replacing them, but eventually you can't keep up with the damage. And what you wind up with is invasion into these damaged areas of the liver in a combination of fat cells. You get something called fatty liver, and scarring, connective tissue, which is cirrhosis of the liver, and liver cancer, possibly. And of course, your liver is a place to store glucose. We've talked about that a bunch of times. Your large intestine and your colon are the same thing. Mom, I need a drink of water. Calvin, it's after midnight. Get a drink yourself. I can't. There are monsters under my bed. I'm scared. Okay. Ah! The monsters are everywhere. What the heck does this have to do with the large intestine? Your food has all that stuff you need to build yourself. But we are a big bag of liquid solution. That liquid is water. And in order to digest stuff, you need a lot of water in your intestines, because that's how all the enzymes move around, and that's how stuff gets moved out and all that stuff. So you've got to leave the water alone in your small intestine, but you need water. You've got to get the water out. Once you're done with terminal digestion, now you've got a chance to get the water out, and that's the primary thing. There are also some minerals that don't absorb well from the small intestine. You absorb them in the large intestine, often with help. Get to that in a bit. And there are other things that you absorb from your large intestine. Your colon's full of bacteria, over 1,000 species of bacteria. We don't know what they're all doing there. For a long time, we knew some of them. There's a bacterium that lives in your colon. It's a very low oxygen environment because it's a big space, and your blood with oxygen is a long way from the space. So it's a low oxygen environment. So they're anaerobic, oxygen disliking bacteria that live in there. It's a great place for them to live. They can live off of some of the stuff that we can't digest. So we're sending them food that isn't really the food that we would have used. So they're commensals, is that they're getting something from us, but we're not really doing it. They're not really doing anything back for us. Some of them are symbiotic, which means we give them a place to live that's really nice, and they give us something back. One of them mobilizes iron, so that iron in its non-rust form doesn't like to dissolve in water. It needs to be mobilized. One of them processes a molecule and produces vitamin K. That makes vitamin K kind of dicey in terms of a definition, because we don't make that coenzyme, our buddies make that coenzyme, but it isn't actually in our food in the vitamin form. And there's other things that they do. We talked about the immune system. They're discovering in the last 30 years, a lot of stuff in the microbiome has to do with interactions between the bacteria and your immune system, helping your immune system to function. Possibly viruses as well. Viruses is kind of a new thing being looked at in the microbiome. But a lot of bacteria. What comes out of the back end of a human being is somewhere around 1/4 bacteria. It's about 1/4 like breakdown products or recycled products like from the liver that we talked about. And it's about 1/2 what's left of your food that you couldn't digest and absorb, roughly. Now, when we did the pigs, the small intestine goes into the side of the large intestine, right? That's the thing I was expecting you to recognize, that it is a T-junction. But in the pig, there's a pretty decent thing sticking out here, the cecum. If it was a rabbit, it would be a foot long. So different animals have different extensions of the cecum. Ours, there's not a heck of a lot of it there, but attached to it is this little projection, and that is the appendix. Famous for not doing anything, which means it's really famous for people going, we don't know what it's doing, must not be doing anything. This microbiome is incredibly important. There are diseases that will cause the lining of your colon to contract forcibly and push everything out, including the water that you're trying to absorb. Welcome to diarrhea. Is that diarrheal diseases, especially if you have them for a few days, can dehydrate you, but also it can clear out your microbiome. The theory now is that this little side pocket, this little extension, has kind of a backup of enough of those bacterial species that once everything settles down, provided you survive the thing, then it can repopulate your colon. They're testing that now. I haven't seen any follow-ups to see, because that's a testable hypothesis. But it's almost certain that the appendix is there for a reason, and it's it's not something that if you have your appendix taken out, it's a horrible, horrible, horrible thing. But it probably has an evolutionary purpose. Right? We don't, unless you're going in for a colonoscopy, that doesn't really apply to people in the United States very often. Oops. Your rectum is holding, well, you know what it's holding. It's holding fecal material, right? The wonderful fecal material, the nice word for it. And it works a little bit like your bladder. So we'll talk about this with the bladder. Not quite exactly the same way, but there does tend to be two valves, a loose internal valve and a tight, controllable external valve. The internal valve, as the rectum fills up with material, it stretches the internal valve, and there are detectors that say to your brain, we're getting kind of full down here, you may want to think about doing something about this. And of course, the external valve, the anal valve, the sphincter, is the controllable one to push stuff out. The rectum, that's conscious peristalsis. It contracts and pushes stuff out. Because of the forcefulness of that, there are times where sometimes veins on the surface protrude, they get squeezed too much. We talked about that when we talked about veins, and that's hemorrhoids. Now that is, I'm looking to make sure I haven't missed anything. That is the digestive system. This is for sure the last thing that's on the third exam. And then we'll pick up the respiratory system for the fourth exam.